Hello, shortcuts. This is Stephen here. This is video 2 for the list. The price list will go out on Wednesday at 9 p.m. That's the 31st of July. Wednesday, 9 p.m. Sydney, Australian Eastern Time. If you see something on this list and you would like to be on the list to maybe buy something that I'm going to show you, then drop me an email, shortcutsrecordsaus@gmail.com. All right, this is a jazz, funk, ska, and soul list. All right, let's get into it. The opening record on tonight's list was actually a pretty easy choice. Headhunters by Herbie Hancock. For those of you who are interested, this pressing is 18AP 2179. It is in fantastic condition. Headhunters, for a while, the biggest selling jazz album of all time. Now, I am going to call into question that this is jazz. This is one of the funkiest records I've ever heard. Love the sleeve. Look at that. The Headhunters. For those of you who aren't aware of the history, Herbie Hancock had been an acoustic piano, hard bop, jazz musician. And in the early 70s, recorded what's called a Mwandishi trilogy, which is a really out there trilogy of very odd, stylistic, kind of very avant-garde music. Sextant was Vinyl Me Please's record of the month last December. And it was somewhat divisive because whilst it sounds spectacular in terms of just how the record was rendered, it is an extremely challenging listen. And as are the others in that trilogy. In fact, High Fidelity, Rhino High Fidelity, who have been releasing a series of very high quality records this year, including Television Marquee Moon and the debut album of Black Sabbath. They did their own version of Crossings by Herbie Hancock, which is another of those outreach, really alien and very expressionistic records. And he's on. He said at the time he thought, I've kind of had it with this, and he disbanded that group, and he made a completely new band for this album. The only person that was consistent was the woodwind player, Bernie Maupin. Everyone else was new. And I think that's a good thing. But I think that part of the reason that this album really leans into funk more than any other jazz album in it before it is because of the drummer, Harvey Mason. He is spectacular. He's the only player on this album who sticks to single instrument for the whole album. So Harvey plays drums on all. All the other guys play multiple different instruments, and you can see that listed on the notes. So why is this record so interesting? Well, Herbie Hancock said, I want to make something, in his words, lighter. I want to make a lighter music. And you hear that from the off. So the opening track, Chameleon, has this squelchy Moog synthesizer sound. It is so welcoming and enveloping. And then this drums, the drums just come in and the groove just hits you immediately. I think one of the great opening tracks of a jazz record, and really the reason I think this album became the phenomenon that it did. The second track is a funk rework of Watermelon Man, which was the best track on Herbie Hancock's debut album, Taken Off, which at the time was a very clear hard bop. But in this world, it's you hear Bernie Maupin playing this very addictive and kind of almost trite woodwind sound. It sounds like there's a couple of different instruments where he's doing breathing in very unusual ways, creating this rhythm. And the next thing, the groove hits, and it is reminiscent of Watermelon Man without being Watermelon Man. But I think that's what makes it work. It's so strong. I think the second side isn't as strong. I mean, people say that this was an accessible album. I think it's still quite difficult in places. It's quite challenging, particularly on side two. But even with all of that, these types of records just really sing the Japanese vinyl. You get that quiet, dynamic, really the instrumentation, the separation, the soundstage, all the stuff that the Japanese are really good at is what makes those Japanese pressings of Headhunters and records like that so intriguing to listen to. Of course, that record, the band took that name and went off to do their own stuff. But yeah, it's a classic. It's in Rolling Stone's top 500 albums of all time. One of the few jazz records in that list. And it deserves to be there. I'm going to talk about a few jazz records that I love in this list, including this next one. Now, last week, I spoke about Katanga, a Blue Note tone poet release that is my personal favorite release of the year. And I think I like it even more. I'm kind of forgetting that the Rhino High Fidelity release of Marquee Moon by Television. And considering I've got my Television T-shirt on, Katanga might have some competition. But I'm going to talk to you about something else that I really like that was released on Blue Note. Now, I can't remember whether it was this year or last year, but I like it. It's this. A New Perspective by Donald Byrd. I was going to read the band. Donald Byrd on trumpet, Hank Mobley on tenor sax, Donald Best on vibes, Kenny Burrell on guitar, Herbie Hancock on piano, thank you. You can see the link. Butch Warren on bass and Lex Humphreys on drums. But arranged by Duke Pearson, who is just a legend at this type of stuff. But there's another element here, which is what elevates this jazz record into a new realm. And I use that word under advisement. Voices directed by Coleridge Perkinson. That is because sprinkled through this record is a gospel choir. But the gospel choir only uses their voice like an instrument. There are no lyrics. So it is like you've got a new instrument in amongst this septet, and it's wonderful. Really. I mean, I don't know much about spiritual jazz. It really isn't a genre that I've explored in any way. But it doesn't matter when it sounds this beautiful. This album just sounds beautiful. And there's the third track, Cristo Redentor, became somewhat of a hit in 63. I think this was recorded in 63. And spiritual jazz became a little bit more of a genre that kind of became more into its own with, Archie Shepp and Michael White and Alice Coltrane kind of later in the 60s and into the 70s. But this is great. And I love Kenny Burrell and I love Almost Blue and Midnight Blue, and I love everything that he does. Kenny Burrell's guitar playing on this record is really special. And, Donald Byrd obviously is an amazing trumpeter, especially on Cristo Redentor. His trumpet playing is, there's only one word to describe it, is lush. It's so pretty. Hank Mobley's always wonderful. It's just a great band. But the choir, and therefore because there's a choir, it almost it requires the band to think of melody in a different way, and it makes it really accessible and really beautiful. And these Blue Note classic recordings, the main difference between these and the Tone Poet are the Tone Poet you get the wide spine gatefold, but the quality of the recordings themselves are very, very similar. In this case, these are pressed in Germany and sound really, really good, really, really good. Give this a listen if you haven't heard it before. Now, I mentioned Herbie Hancock as a kind of hard bop pianist and band leader. And this, of course, is probably his most famous record in that sphere. So I just thought I'd stick a copy of this on. Again, for those of you who are into it, BST 84195, a very, very lovely copy of Maiden Voyage. Between Maiden Voyage and Headhunters, you've pretty much got the best of Herbie Hancock as a band leader. And then with something like A New Perspective by Donald Byrd, you can hear how he can fill in and create beauty in a band. These players are legendary for a reason. Okay, well, we've had 3 jazz records in a row. Let's go with some vocal jazz. I really like this. So this is Argo, which was a spin-off of the Chess label. But this is Lorez Alexandria, and it's called For Swingers Only. Lorez Alexandria, born in Chicago, came up through the Chicago jazz and blues scene, which is about as good a jazz and blues scene as there is anywhere on the planet. But she went off to LA and recorded soundtrack vocals and all that kind of stuff. And she's got a really smoky, thick, soulful voice. But this is vocal jazz, but super high quality, really smooth. Some cover versions with the likes of Little Girl Blue. For those of you who like your female swing jazz, this is right up there. All right, I've got a couple more jazz, a few more jazz to go, and then we're going to move into some soul. This is Symbiosis by Bill Evans. Now, I, and like many of you out there, big Bill Evans fan, and he has many different tenets of jazz that he has explored. Now, in this case, this is him playing with an orchestra. And so, this is a big sound. This is really cool. Glenn Gould, the famed Canadian pianist, loved this record, and it inspired soundtracks for all sorts of really interesting movies. What was it called? The Black Messiah movie from a couple of years ago, and more famously, Sideways. The theme to Sideways, that 2000s movie that made inroads at the Oscars. This is the Alexander Payne movie. This album inspired the music that underpinned that great movie. So this is not very expensive. None of these records are very expensive, maybe other than Headhunters, which is a little bit more pricey. But a lot of these are very reasonably priced and really, really, really interesting. So there you go. Talking about interesting, what about this? We spoke about Kenny Burrell, the jazz guitarist, a few minutes ago. Probably the only jazz guitarist really that kind of competes at that Kenny Burrell level. Maybe Jim Hall, but I don't think so. I think it's Grant Green. And this is Grant Green's final record before he passed away in 1976, and it is called Easy. And that is what it is. It is like a beautifully mellow concoction of his greatest hits, and it's really, I think it's quite poignant. If you're a fan of Grant Green, having a copy of this on your shelf, I think, is pretty special. All right, final jazz record. Is it the final one? Yeah, it is. All right, this one's a little bit different. So in the 80s, Miles Davis pivoted to all sorts of different genres. But in the mid 80s in particular, moved as close toward kind of pop and more commercial sound than ever. And he recorded something that became a staple in his live show from then on, and became something that Cyndi Lauper spoke about as her proudest moment. This is Miles Davis's version of Cyndi Lauper's classic Time After Time. This is the 12-inch long version, which is about 9 minutes in length. It's on the CBS Sony label. I'm just going to see. I'm trying to remember what was on side 2. Side B is a song called Katia. But this is still in the shrink wrap. I don't think it's ever been played. It's still got the OB/hype sticker. Yeah, Cyndi Lauper loved this. So did Miles. And as I said, it became something that he played for the rest of his life. So that's something I think is pretty lovely. All right. Talking about lovely, before we go to 3, I've got 3 kind of shortcuts royalty records to finish. I am just going to talk about this record a little bit. You all know how much I love Aretha. This is an underappreciated but rather fabulous Aretha album with a very odd sleeve. Hey Now Hey, The Other Side of the Sky, Aretha Franklin. Now, it's impossible really to tell what way around this record. I guess it's meant to be that way around. It's very strange. And then inside, you've got this kind of business and this kind of thing. 1973. This was originally perceived as a almost kind of vocal jazz record, but it became a funk record more than anything. It's at the German first press. It's on the Atlantic label. You can see there. It sounds amazing. This is a record where the songs, within a single song, Aretha can veer from playing kind of funky, soulful piano, and the next thing you know, she's in drenched strings and it's high drama. I think it's, as I said, a very underappreciated and really enjoyable Aretha album. And if you fancy a bit of high quality German vinyl, that one's as good as it gets. All right, I got 3 records to go that are clearly shortcuts royalty at this stage. One is kind of ska, the other is soul, and the final is funk. I'm not going to spend too much time on these because you know them. This is the Japanese first press of the Specials debut album. If you haven't got this, it's great. It really, really is great. And so I know some of you have given me feedback on this record in the past. Classic. The lineage between Toots and the Maytals and the Specials is a lot of fun. And I still love the fact that the Specials covered Monkey Man, that amazing Toots and the Maytals song, on that album. All right, the Japanese adored Otis Redding. This is their version of what was called a Shrine record. So there's the recognition of Otis Redding, who passed away so suddenly and sadly in 1967. There's the best of Otis. And so basically, this is the story of Otis on a double album that sounds amazing. I think at least 40 of you at this point have this record. Maybe more. I don't know how many copies of this I've sold over the years. Man, I don't know, probably more than anything else. I reckon it's 40 or 50, maybe more. It's that good. And then finally, this is a little bit more of a recent a recent Shortcuts royalty entry, but it's royalty nonetheless. And it is the absolutely superb, I was going to get this right, Wild and Peaceful by Kool and the Gang. Plundered, of course, by Quentin Tarantino for Jungle Boogie, for Reservoir Dogs. But that's not the only amazing song on here. Funky stuff, more funky stuff, Heaven at Once. Wild and Peaceful itself, the 9-minute closer, is wild and peaceful. It does what it says on the tin. But there you have 3 Shortcuts royalty to finish. You've got absolutely wonderful Kool the Gang, Otis Redding, and the Specials, amongst all of that jazz that I spoke about earlier. Well, I think that's an interesting and eclectic list. I will look forward to your feedback. If you would like to be on the price list for that's going to go out 9 p.m. on Wednesday, then drop me a note, shortcutsrecordsaus@gmail.com. Thank you, as always. Bye.